A telephone conversation has taken place between Russia's Defence Minister, Sergei Shoigu, and his American counterpart, Lloyd Austin. It marks the highest level of American contact with a Russian official since the war in Ukraine began in late February.
For analysis on the conflict in Ukraine, we're now joined by retired Major General Mick Ryan. Mick Ryan, thank you for joining us on the program. Tell me, how important is it that these lines of communication remain open? They didn't seem to achieve a lot on this call, but they've made contact with each other, the US and Russia here.
Well, good morning. It's very important that this contact has been re-established between the US and Russian most senior military people. Throughout the Cold War, a hotline was maintained between these two countries to clear up misconceptions and just to keep a line open, so they were always talking. So I think this was important that it took place, and I'm sure there were things discussed that weren't in the official press release on the conversation.
Alongside all this, there have been some quite significant moves in the last few days for Finland to approach NATO, to approach formally joining NATO. They were possibly expecting to make an announcement on that at some stage this weekend. What would that do to the complexion of this conflict at this stage?
Well, Russia isn't going to be a threat on its northern flank from Finland, but it certainly complicates its life diplomatically. I mean, Finland was neutral throughout the entirety of the Cold War. For it now to want to join NATO sends a message not just to the Russians, but the rest of the world about the threat potentially posed by Russia into the future. The Russians have already cut off the electricity to Finland. They supply about 10%. Whether they can do much more than that remains to be seen.
They've announced there's a Russian gas supplier that's announced today cutting off gas supplies to Finland. What would the impact of that be? I mean, is this a slow creep of more and more sanctions taking place from Russia against Finland?
I think Finland's probably less worried by Russian sanctions than potential other actions it might take. But the reality is Finland is backed by NATO and the United States, who have immensely more economic power than the Russians have at the moment. So these Russian sanctions will be inconvenient for Finland, but they're not going to hurt them in the long term.
There are reports from eastern Ukraine about major losses by the Russian military in an attempt to cross a river there, that an entire battalion, a Russian battalion, has been lost. How much credibility are you putting in this report, and what do you make of the impact that would have on morale and the pressure to achieve more gains now?
Well, I think the reports are very credible. It's been not only reported by the press and social media, but the UK Defence Ministry is also briefed on this particular event. It's actually pretty important. These are very complex, very difficult manoeuvres to conduct an assault river crossing. And generally they're only conducted in an area where you think you will make major progress. The fact that this failed will be a large setback for the Russians, and they've probably lost more than a battalion tactical group. They've lost the opportunity of advancing in an area where they thought they'd make progress in their eastern offensive.
What does that mean for the conflict more broadly? Because it appears now that things are a bit of a stalemate. Is that right?
Well, they're almost at the point we saw towards, mid-April around northern Kiev, where the Russians had culminated. They couldn't go any further. The Ukrainians weren't yet advancing. We're almost at that point. I think the Russians are close to culminating in their eastern offensive. They're not quite there yet. But, in the coming days, maybe the next couple of weeks, they will. And we could see some very different tactical postures from the Russians when that occurs. They may go to the defensive, which will make life difficult for the Ukrainians to take back ground.
G7 countries are meeting to discuss offering more support to Ukraine. The European Union's just announced, I think, $520 million in support to the Ukrainian side to help fend off the Russian attacks. Do you see a time when that level of support will start to dry up the longer this goes?
Well, possibly. Certainly the United States, Canada and the United Kingdom have been three very large contributors to the defence of Ukraine through military, economic, humanitarian aid. The Europeans have been good contributors, but this is starting to catch up in some respects to the big three that have been contributing. Western democracies do get tired of wars rather quickly. We saw that in Iraq and Afghanistan, and potentially that could occur in this conflict in Ukraine, but probably not in the coming weeks. But by the end of the year, if this is still going on, Western audiences have probably moved on to other things, unfortunately.
Mick Ryan, great to have you on Analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.